Forest Service monies for recreation trails are decreasing as demand increases. What will you do to increase financial support for trail construction, maintenance, and trailhead amenities?
Well, that's a really good question also, and we know that the summer use and the demand on those trails is only increasing. And there of course was a recent proposal from the U.S. Forest Service saying we need to start feeing people in the canyons so that we can improve parking, so that we can improve some of these trails. I have been very outspoken on the fees and the monies in the canyons. Sometimes they will refer to, oh, it works really well in American Fork Canyon to be feeing. We can then use some of those monies locally. They also talk about Mill Creek. But what I say to them is you are not comparing apples to apples. Big and Little Cottonwood Canyon are tremendous economic drivers. There are already millions and millions of dollars coming out of those canyons every year. And so what I want and what I will demand is an accounting of those monies. How much monies are coming out? Where are those monies being spent? Because, for example, the Forest Service, they have leases on a lot of the properties with the ski resorts, and they are receiving monies there. Are some of those monies able to be used for trail improvements? We also have Salt Lake City that has an open space fund, and they collect about $1.5 million every year that comes out of those canyons. They also have a fund that about $1 million for watershed rangers. Well, I will certainly ask, why do we need watershed rangers when we have the state monitoring up there, we have the federal monitors up there, and we also have the sheriff? And so, first and foremost, how much money is coming out of those canyons? Because my accounting would show at least $15 million is coming out of those canyons and not being put back in. And so the fact that the Forest Service is saying that they do not have enough money for some simple trail improvements, I'm really suspicious of. And I believe that accurate accounting will show that there's plenty of money to do some of those improvements.
Well, that's really good to hear. There's nothing like these trails to go up in the mountains, and they are not very expensive compared to a lot of other projects that.
Right, and we look at things and we say every time we turn around, we are getting feed and charged. And one of the tremendous benefits of living close to these mountains is it is free and accessible recreation, and we need to keep it that way.
Wow, that's nice to know, having just been up in the canyons the past couple
Right.
days and been screaming about fees. So, okay, difficulty in obtaining trail access and easements are impeding trail expansion and threaten existing trail access. What will you do to solve these problems that affect the enjoyment of Salt Lake residents?
This is a really important area that I've worked on for a number of years. For those that are aware, there's a lot of mining claims that are in those canyons. They are patchwork holdings of private lands throughout, and so you might have Forest Service land. Salt Lake City owns about 36,000 acres up there, but there are a lot of private holdings. And I have worked closely with the private landowners. For example, I helped set up the Cardiff Canyon special use permit. Cardiff Canyon and the Cardiff Bowl is one of the most highly sought after backcountry ski areas in North America. And then of course you have a lot of summer demand as well. Well, what was happening up there is the skiers would come through that canyon, and then as the hikers during the summer would go up there, they would see private property, no trespassing signs. There was a lot of conflict between the public and private users. And so I worked closely with the private landowners, worked closely with a couple of the clubs, Wasatch Hiking Club was one of those. I work closely with the state of Utah and also the Forest Service, and we put a special use permit in place. And what that special use permit does is it ensures that the public has access across private lands, across the existing roads and trails, and that the Forest Service has access across those private lands as well. And in return, the private landowners were ensured vehicular access to their private lands without a fee being charged. And so there are some really, really important items that need to occur in order to ensure access across these private lands and ensure the quality of experience that the backcountry users have. But the most important thing is to make sure that we have very strong relationships, working relationships between the private landowners and the public. And we must respect the fact that there are a lot of private lands out there, and those are tax-paying citizens.
It's very well thought out, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, air quality. We've got water quality and air quality. Air quality, as everyone sees, it's health along the Wasatch Front. It's health threatening. What step will you take to make our air breathable during all 4 seasons?
Sure. Of course, Mother Nature, when this valley was formed, it's really nice to be able to see the mountains around us, but we are set up naturally to have inversions. And but what that does is it actually puts us to where we need to be more vigilant on areas that do affect air quality. And I would actually refer back to what we were talking to earlier about the Great Salt Lake. We are seeing the Great Salt Lake levels at historic lows, and there are some tremendous concerns with that. As the lake lowers, we are seeing more and more of the beach exposed. A lot of the material that has been held underwater for years has been toxic materials that have come out of the mines in the canyons and down those streams. And so as the wind comes across that lake, we are seeing more dust and more toxic dust. And so we really need to come back and look at how do we get more water going into the Great Salt Lake. And yes, you're correct, Utah is a very dry state, but we're also consuming a lot of water, and people can talk about slow the flow and putting shower heads on their showers that limit water, but the real water that we need to be consumption that we need to be looking at is what is being used out in our landscaping and out in our yards. We really, as a county, need to look at having water-wise ordinances, and maybe it starts with just new construction. But we really need to get people thinking on the water consumption that they are having in those yards, and we need to have that water bypassing those areas and going to the Jordan River and to the Great Salt Lake, which will then raise the lake, which will then cover that a lot of the dry area up, which will then prevent a lot of the dust coming across. Another area, as we mentioned before, that can affect water quality but also affects air quality. We know that when there are forest fires around, a lot of that smoke comes and settles in this valley. We are very susceptible to forest fires as residents in this valley, whether it's the East Bench, whether it's out west. We saw Antelope Island, and so we need to be much more vigilant on fire mitigation and being preventive and proactive there.
Okay, so I'm on question 5. Did you
Okay.
want to ask about, and it's halfway, I don't know how, so I go like this. Wait.
2 fingers.
Oh, okay.
Did it work?
Yeah. Okay, so is there anything? Wait, okay. Oh, wait. I'm used to a desktop, sorry.
That's
I'm
fine.
trying to make it go into the first half. Okay.
Air quality.
Okay, it's sneak question 5 and 6
Okay.
there. Okay.
The Central Wasatch Commission is directed to solve environmental challenges and how Salt Lake support these efforts.
Are you just going to send this to Sierra Club, or are you going to type this all out?
We're sending them a link to a video.
Okay, yeah. I think that's better, because
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see if this one is. Okay, ready for question 5?
Sure.
Okay, great, Dave. Thanks for your thoughts on this. And I just, you don't propose a giant fan to blow all the. I've heard that. Giant fans to blow.
If one can find a big fan big enough and you think it'll work, try it.
Okay, I think there's a joke in there about BYU sucking or something. Okay, I'm just, not to offend any BYU fans, I graduated from BYU. So, okay, the Central Wasatch Commission is directed to solving environmental, transportation, and land use issues. How will Salt Lake County support these efforts?
Well, acknowledging that there's a Central Wasatch Commission, I think, is certainly premature. The Central Wasatch Commission idea, as I understand it, came out of Mountain Accord. And it's an extension. They're now looking at dissolving Mountain Accord and moving into the Central Wasatch Commission. I have stated throughout the Mountain Accord process that Mountain Accord is using public funds. They have petitioned for public funds, and they have spent millions of dollars in public funds. They, Mountain Accord, have claimed year after year that they are not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act.
Wow.
And I have read their reasoning. It basically comes down to, well, we have a lot of public entities on there, but we also have some private parties on there, and therefore we are not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. I don't believe that that is accurate. And if you look at the Open and Public Meetings Act, if there has been a violation of it, it then calls into question all of the decisions, the guidelines, everything of the group that was functioning under that. And so before I even state that I would support the Central Wasatch Commission, we need to be ensured that Mountain Accord is either correct in their presenting that they are not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, or we need a legal decision on, yes, they are subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. And if they are subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, where does that lead Mountain Accord and the decisions, and that will affect the Central Wasatch Commission. So I am not saying that I support the Central Wasatch Commission because I have some real concerns that it is coming out of a body that very well violated the law.
Wow. Well, it's interesting, especially in light of what's been going on with the UTA and their closed meetings, and so I do appreciate what you're saying.
And just as a, you mentioned the UTA, Mountain Accord, funds were actually directed through UTA for some time on that, and we really need an accurate legal interpretation of the Open and Public Meetings Act and how it's applied with Mountain Accord.
Well, it's nice to see that you don't just go along with every government program that comes along. Let's create it. And
it makes me really popular in certain settings.
Well, it makes you popular with the people. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last question from the Sierra Club is, the ski industry is a large contributor to Salt Lake County's economy, and residents enjoy outdoor winter sports, including skiing. What will you do to address climate change in the county?
Well, I would come back again to the issue of the Great Salt Lake. We know that as those levels lower, we get less lake effect snow. There's a reason why we are the greatest snow on Earth, and so we certainly need to do everything we can to increase the levels of the Great Salt Lake. It comes back to, for me, it comes back to the levels of the Great Salt Lake. We know that as the levels of the Great Salt Lake increase, we have more lake effect coming off there, which then puts more snow in the mountains. We have one of the reasons why we have the greatest snow on Earth is because of the Great Salt Lake, and so we need to make sure that the levels are rising in the Great Salt Lake instead of decreasing.